Hello.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, that's really great.
Oh, okay.
I
Cool.
got apologize for that. I didn't realize new profiles have that limitation.
Oh yeah. Okay. I don't know. Is it okay? I don't know if anyone can see it, but I did post a link.
Uh,
But
yeah. So the link's been posted.
does it tell
Might
you
be
if people
helpful to
come in
post.
this room?
It should. I think you should be able to see it too.
Oh really?
Let
Oh.
me let me double check that.
So I just copied the link you sent me on Facebook, right? On Messenger. That's it.
Yeah, yeah. And we're already
Okay.
recording, so I should
Oh
be able to
okay.
send this to you after too.
Okay. Cool.
Nobody else is currently joined, but oh yeah, Kyle's just joined.
Oh okay. Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
okay. So yeah, I mean, we could probably get started, and because this will be recorded and postable afterwards, people can still see it. I'm sure people want to join live, but I don't know if anybody's seen
Listening
that link
to, I'll
yet.
keep it low. It's that Harvard guy
Mhm.
on the debate with Andy.
I don't
Yeah,
know
so
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I listen to it quietly. All right.
Yeah.
As long as you don't get upset about that.
No, I don't.
Kyle, I think we can hear whoever's in the background.
Oh, you guys can hear me? I'm sorry. My bad.
That's all right.
Yeah.
This is actually a pretty good platform to do it, Andy, for future
Yeah.
reference.
I know, right? As long as we
Yeah,
can.
this is the
As long as
platform
we can
I'm used to.
put people in.
But yeah,
I think
so
Andy's on
Andy,
mute. Or
Am I? Can you hear me?
no, I can hear Andy. I can hear him.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, okay. So I guess I should introduce myself and my background and where I come from. And basically, I am, as I mentioned before in the group, an mRNA technology specialist. And I hold several patents and papers in mRNA technology. I'm a full stack bioengineer in the sense that I'm able to design, create, manufacture, and ensure to preclinical, clinical standards that mRNA technology is effective, working, safe. I have degrees from Ivy League, so I have a Caltech and a Harvard degree. And I've worked at over a dozen different biotechs over the course of my lifetime, and I have over a dozen publications as well. So yeah, that's me. And I have also previously physically been inside of the Moderna manufacturing facilities, and I am well acquainted with the old CSO of Moderna. And I have also worked previously, many years ago actually, at Pfizer very briefly in their immunology department. And this was well before they began developing the vaccines. But during the pandemic, before it was even public knowledge, I did sit in on several different internal meetings and presentations as an observer for the mRNA vaccines and their historical development and their then status at the clinical stage in terms of the approval process and the safety profiles of them. So at that time, the interim NIAID director was part of that meeting, and I sat in. So I wasn't a decision maker or a person responsible for making the vaccine specifically, but I have a lot of familiarity with key people involved in that process, as well as being part of those meetings as an observer, and personally am able to make things like the mRNA vaccines.
Oh wow. Well, you're just the guy to talk to then.
I would say that I'm not the only kind of person who could speak pretty well about the vaccines, their safety profiles and whatnot, but I am one of them. So yeah.
So, was this vaccine created faster than other vaccines?
So I would say the answer to that is no. It wasn't created faster than other vaccines, mainly because this technology is actually really old. And when I say that, I mean that people like Catalin Carrico in the 1980s, I've been inside her lab before, by the way, and they, all the way back in 1980s, they already began transfecting people with mRNA. So DNA type transfections, viral transfections, that type of technology has existed for an exceptionally long time, where people have always been trying to deliver genetic therapies in order to cure various diseases or help the body able to create things to address problems that the body naturally can't do on its own. So back then, Catalan Carrico discovered pseudouridine, which is a modified version of the U base in the RNA. And it's special because in the human body, when we detect raw, naked, double-stranded RNA, our cells recognize it through something like the RIG-I receptor, which detects double-stranded RNA, and it says, oh, we have a virus in our cells, and then our cells kill themselves. And it was found that there's a dependency on this natural U base for the body to be able to recognize the fact that there's like some sort of foreign viral mRNA or something. And so if you change that U to a pseudouridine, it no longer triggers this negative effect in the body that causes cells to kill themselves. And it creates what is called stealth mRNA. And that stealth mRNA is then able to safely express in human bodies without the human bodies having a negative impact on itself. So that technology has been developed since the 1980s. And originally, when a company like Moderna was created, they weren't actually going after something like COVID. They were going after broad classes of viruses because they had invented a platform that was able to create really clean RNA. And as far as the body is concerned, when it comes to stealth mRNA, all mRNA is just a random string of nucleotides, and it doesn't really matter what the sequence is. It all gets treated the same and you don't have a negative extreme reaction to those types of mRNA structures when they're encompassed inside of an LNP. So the specific sequence will then go inside of the cells, and that's when it becomes whatever you're trying to express, whether it's a genetic therapy for some terrible disease or a vaccine antigen for any kind of virus. So at the time,
was it
Moderna
used
had
for this
created,
kind of vaccine before?
it was used for very similar kinds of vaccines, yes. So Moderna
mRNA
had
one?
previously, yeah, actually. So in
So why did they say
2014,
it's
we
new?
already. Well, that's a misconception by the public, right? Like a lot of people have been speaking a lot about these vaccines, but people don't actually like really know what is happening with these vaccines because they're getting it all from secondhand sources that aren't directly involved with this process.
Well, it's
but
called
I am,
Operation
so I can
Warp
explain these
Speed.
things. Yeah. So it's called Operation Warp Speed, but as early as
Wow.
2014, we already had the Ebola vaccine, which was an mRNA type vaccine. It was just not enclosed in an LNP. It was enclosed in a viral, vector shell. But that was actually an mRNA vaccine. And even before we ended up getting the approval for the Moderna, or the Pfizer mRNA COVID vaccines, we already had the H10N vaccine, which was an mRNA type vaccine that got approval through the Moderna, right?
So why do you
they
think they
actually
called
already
it
had that.
Operation Warp Speed?
They called it Operation Warp Speed because the goal was to be able to get these deployed as quickly as possible to everybody. And there were some vaccine manufacturers that may have been a little bit more behind than others, right? So there's multiple mRNA vaccines.
Deployed or created?
I'm sorry?
Deployed or created?
Deployed. So with regards to the Moderna one, as soon as the pandemic hit, even before Operation Warp Speed was a thing, the Moderna company was like, hey, we already have these mRNA vaccines that we've already tested for MERS, for SARS, for Zika, all these other indications that, work. And because our platform is modular, let's rapidly create a altered sequence that is very similar to the ones we've already done, right? So this is BIOS iteration, basically. And this is something that's already done for existing vaccines like the flu vaccine. So you have a flu vaccine that was here from last year, you iterate it for the new sequence for the next year, but it's still basically the same drug. So the same safety profile applies to that previous flu vaccine. And so the same thing was done for the Moderna vaccines, where you had pre-existing decade worth of trial results for the SARS and MERS vaccines, but none of these made it to full clinical approval because they weren't pushing it very hard, because there wasn't a necessary need for us to really get those out there, because there were no breakouts of SARS, because SARS had been successfully contained already. So it really takes in the industry, a need for something to get approved for a company to invest all the resources to push it to clinical approval, right? In the first place, in general, vaccines are not necessarily profitable. And the reason they're not profitable is because you need to reach herd immunity for a vaccine to really work. That's how all vaccines in the end work. It can provide some level of protection for people who take it as individuals, but ultimately, because of the way the immune system works, the human immune system is a piece of garbage. You need to make sure that the percentage of people is high enough to prevent spread at a population level. And in order to do that, you basically need to give this vaccine out for free to almost everybody for a vaccine to be effective. And that's why vaccines in general aren't profitable, unless you have an emergency where the government is going to be subsidizing all these vaccines so that, the company actually gets paid for disseminating all these to that many people. And that's why companies prior to the pandemic were actually all shutting down their vaccine divisions. Pfizer was in the process of actually winding down their department, and then the pandemic hit, and then the government said, we're going to subsidize this. And that's what actually revitalized Pfizer. And if you see now that the emergency is now considered over and the government's not funding anymore, Pfizer's laying off like 1,000 people because it's not profitable. If you go on r/biotech, which is just a bunch of random people talking about it, you'll see Pfizer's gone through like 3-4 rounds of layoff because they're losing money off this vaccine now that there's no subsidy. And that's basically why, even though there were existing vaccine prototypes, they didn't actually push it to market, because you can't make money off of a vaccine unless there is support that is pre-existing, and that's very rare.
Huh. So the warp speed only refers to the deployment, not the creation?
The warp speed referred to both, but not every company required it for the creation process, because some people were more far ahead. Moderna in particular didn't need warp speed in order to create their vaccine, because they had what is called a modular platform. Right, they had already a delivery thing that's universal for any virus, because all you have to do is target the immune cells, right? And that works for no matter what your sequence is. And they already had a pre-existing technique for making sure that you could lock any beta coronavirus spike into a pre-fusion form, and that mutation was held the same for all viruses. So they already tested it in MERS, they already tested it in SARS, and COVID is just SARS-2. Which means that all they had to do was just slightly alter the sequence, and it's the same drug, and it's ready to be deployed instantly. And that's why they didn't need support to develop their particular drug in terms of the invention process. They just needed scale up, and they needed to parallelize the phases of the different clinical trials. So when they're taking these clinical trials, they're not accelerating the clinical trials in a way that violates safety standards. What they're doing is they have similar drugs that have gone through most of this approval process before, and they can present that safety data as related data that gives proof that this new vaccine is going to be safe once it hits the market or hits government deployment. And so they ran everything in parallel. And to be sure, you can run studies in parallel. There's no actual technical or safety reason why you can't do that. The reason why companies don't do that is because obviously recording 30,000 people for a clinical trial takes millions of dollars. And if you're not sure you're going to pass the initial clinical approval process, you don't want to take that giant financial risk. However, if the government's the one funding these trials, then the company no longer has the financial risk associated with a potential rejection at phase 1 or phase 2, because it's not their money that they're going to lose, which is why they could afford to run all 3 phases in a staggered but overlapping fashion. And
can I chime in for a second? Can I chime in real quick? Is it safe to say that part of the warp speed aspect of the creation of the vaccine was the fact that all the big pharmaceutical companies were working on it at the same time, versus other things where maybe not all the companies, not every pharmaceutical company has the same interest to develop the same vaccine, whereas this time you had all the best minds on the planet working to race for a vaccine?
I actually wouldn't really say that that's the case, because honestly, Moderna and Pfizer were still competing with each other during this time. And yeah, everybody was trying to work on this, but I wouldn't say there was any like specific special mobilization of like new, like super smart people that became involved later in the process. It's really just like companies operating mostly the way that they did before, but they had government funding and government support for this, for the manufacturing and distribution process. One of the biggest problems with mRNA technology is the fact that the manufacturing process is pretty difficult to pull off. And it requires RNA nucleotides, and RNA nucleotides that go into, the polynucleotide form to create the mRNA structure. That is a very intensive process to be able to acquire those things. The way it's typically done is you grow up a whole bunch of bacteria, you kill those bacteria, and you harvest their nucleotides, their RNA nucleotides. And a gigantic Olympic swimming pool size amount of bacteria that is like fully confluent, that only gets you like, I don't know, like a pound or something of nucleotides. Now imagine how much you would need to be able to inject like 300 million people in the US. That's a crazy amount of nucleotides that you would need to be able to make all those vaccines. And that manufacturing scale up part is really hard.
That's a crazy amount of physical vaccines to create in that amount of time too.
Yeah, so that's why, you know, a lot of the times in terms of making vaccines, it's quite difficult to do things really quickly. A lot of the case in terms of why it takes so long for clinical trials to get to where they do in a normal fashion is because it takes a long time to recruit people. It takes a long time to actually secure the manufacturing facilities, and that eats up a lot of time that isn't necessarily involved with the actual assessment of the patients and the safety profile. Typically speaking, we generally understand how to quantify whether or not a vaccine is still inside of a person. We understand how to quantify, you know, the health effects and what the window is for any sort of vaccine's, you know, negative effects. Because vaccines are ancient. They're centuries old at this point, from the 1700s. We know how to go into a cell, and we know how to figure out if there's any expression impact on a human cell whatsoever with a technique called RNA-seq. You harvest all the RNA from a person, the total RNA from a person. You turn that into cDNA with reverse transcriptase. You sequence it with the next generation sequencer, and then you quantify all of it in terms of the relative expression level compared to a control cell. When you do that, you can say, oh, after 2 weeks, there's literally nothing different about a human cell that was treated with this vaccine versus not treated with a vaccine. It's 100% conclusive that way when you do an entire transcriptome sequencing event like that. There's no room for
is this a vaccine or is it genetic therapy?
So that's an excellent question. And the answer to this is yes, it's a vaccine, but all vaccines throughout history are technically genetic therapies if they involve any sort of live transcription. Because what happens with the very first vaccine in history, like cowpox, right? You had cowpox as the vaccination for smallpox, right? And it was live cowpox. You put that cowpox into somebody, that cowpox is going to create its own vaccine antigen spike, right? And that's a gene therapy. So the answer is it's both. It is a gene therapy and it is a vaccine, but it's not a gene therapy in the way that people like are scared about in terms of, oh, this is going to do weird things to your body permanently and like insert a new gene into your genome forever. That's not what this is. This is a transient mRNA therapy, and mRNA gets destroyed. And we have RNA-seq results to back up the fact that if you do this experiment where you put this vaccine onto a cell, you sequence it and you sequence control, you can prove, any third party can prove this, that the vaccine isn't permanently changing your genome. All it takes is a genome sequencer. You, Andy, you could literally do this experiment yourself where you go out and you buy a minion whole genome sequencer for $1,000, and then you could prove to yourself that it's not actually getting inserted. And a lot of people with disposable income can do that. I have a minion sequencer in my house, and I can prove to you in my own experiment that I do over the course of like a week that this vaccine is not permanently integrating into your DNA.
Is it changing the DNA?
No, it's not changing your DNA. Like the most that this would do in terms of the impact on your genomics or epigenomics is the fact that when your body has to respond to anything, it creates proteins, right? It creates proteins, and it does that by effecting a change through transcription of some relevant genes. So when you're sick or something, your body has a fever or whatever, right? In order to do that, it needs to create pyrogens that raise your body temperature. To produce these pyrogens, it needs to create the transcripts for the genes that make them. And to do that, it changes your epigenetics by, you know, unlocking this gene for a set period amount of time where you're able to get that fever, and then you go back to a normal expression profile. And that's how acute inflammation works in the human body. So with regards to these vaccines, you'll see some epigenetic shifts that are normal for a reaction to any type of vaccine or any type of pathogen. But this is not something that is changing your DNA permanently on a fundamental level with regards to, you know, your standard tissues. But one thing I should note is that individual cells in your body, like B cells or T cells, every time you have an immune event, what they end up doing is they will end up mutating the parts of themselves that contain antibodies or T cell receptors for specific pathogens, right? So every time you get a flu or a cold or something, your B cells undergo this hypermutation process where they rapidly mutate the antibodies, and then the B cells will go enter gladiatorial combat with themselves and each other in the lymph nodes. And the best antibody from whatever mutated B cell you have that is really good at attacking the flu or the cold will end up surviving, and that's the antibody that you will now produce from now on. So a single B cell or a single specific T cell, they'll change their DNA, but that's how they're supposed to work. And it's not the vaccine specifically changing their DNA. That's part of the natural process of how the human immune system works. That's the only part of your DNA that changes. It's not changed by the vaccine's specific mode of action itself. And the vaccine doesn't change the rest of your body. That's not supposed to change its DNA. So why
is it that some vaccines, like the flu, they tell you to take it every year, like with COVID vaccines, how they come up with a new one, but some vaccines you only need one time?
Yeah, so that's a really, really good question. And really the answer tends to be a function of the specific disease itself, right? So some diseases, they don't appear very often, and so they haven't had a lot of a chance to really mutate that much. And then other diseases are endemic, and they keep infecting different people and keep mutating over time. So the flu and the common cold, they keep doing that. They're everywhere, so they keep mutating, and they're able to continuously beat the vaccination and immunity over time because we don't have high compliance with flu vaccines. And so we're never going to eradicate it if only 20% of people keep vaccinating. Then of course it's never going to stop. It's just going to keep mutating, eventually keep beating immunity. But then something like childhood diseases that are kind of rare these days in most areas, if you do get it, it's probably going to be an older form of that particular pathogen that hasn't had a lot of time to mutate. And that's why your particular vaccine is going to be slightly more effective. But the truth is, vaccines in general are never bulletproof vests. Every vaccine in history only has a % effectiveness rate at creating these antibodies that actually work against a disease.
Sometimes it can work. It can be worse than what the actual disease is.
Well, we have to disagree on most vaccines. There are certain vaccines that are pretty bad, but this is considered to be worth it.
I've gotten the flu vaccine once, 10 years ago, and I've never felt sick. I've never had a worse flu in my life. It was literally the day after I got it. I was convinced to get it by my mother.
That
and
some
it was
people
so
have.
Bizarre.
Sure, I can understand that some people have, negative reactions to vaccines, and I can understand that it can feel not so good. And then, for example,
it literally gave me exactly what I was trying to avoid when I was never even sick before.
The military has a specific type of vaccine against anthrax, right? And this vaccine is required by all soldiers to take. And this one actually has a pretty decently high rate of adverse events that are significant and severe. But that's not the kind of vaccine that we give to civilians in general. So the answer to your question is, yes, there exists certain vaccines that aren't deployed to the general public that can have severe negative effects.
No, I'm talking about the flu vaccine, just the regular one.
Yeah, the flu vaccine can have negative effects, right? And the flu vaccine can have severe negative reactions. All vaccines throughout human history have had a non-zero rate of severe negative reactions.
So the question is, how many is there, and what's the acceptable number? That's really
right. So
what I'm trying to get at
an
here.
Excellent question, and that's an excellent concern for people to have. And the way that we assess this type of problem is, well, we start looking at both the clinical trial data and we start collecting for a prolonged period after we deploy this to general public. And that's what something like VAERS is, where in the VAERS studies, every doctor is required to report any sort of negative reaction like that to VAERS, and any random person who has a negative reaction can report it to VAERS, and then the people at VAERS are supposed to pay them for it.
What's the difference between the numbers of the COVID mRNA vaccine deaths and reactions compared to all the other vaccines that VAERS keeps track of? Do you know?
That's a good question. So the answer to this is that if you take a look at the VAERS data for, say, 2022, what you'll see is that the flu vaccine actually has a higher rate of associated, not proven, mind you, but associated potential adverse events that don't have the confounding factors that make it easy to explain immediately. So the flu vaccine actually had more adverse reactions than the COVID vaccines in 2022. And so we don't necessarily see a huge number of negative reactions directly attributable and provable as from the vaccine.
But they're
when we
listed
take a look
there,
at,
right? The
they're
number is
listed on
way
there,
higher.
but you have to remember,
for COVID
that
vaccine.
half of all people in the U.S. have a chronic disease, and the death rate of people in a non-COVID year, non-COVID vaccine year, like 2018, was actually pretty high. It's like 170
Well, that's a big problem in
per,
itself, you know. Like, what's going
I
on?
mean,
that,
yeah,
that
it's a big
many
problem
people,
in itself,
you
but
know,
that's
like
just
that.
how
That's really a
the world
question.
is.
That's not how. I mean, I don't think you could say that for 80 years ago, could you?
It was actually worse 80 years ago. If you take a look at
More
all the
than
death
half the people
figures, yeah, dude,
disease,
human
really?
health is a really shitty thing. Like, that's what people don't realize. 60% of modern Americans have a chronic disease, which actually counts as a
What's the reason for
comorbidity
that
factor for
in
COVID.
2023?
What's the reason for that? Human bodies
Yeah.
are absolute crap. Evolution does not care about humans. Nature is a really shitty thing. Like, humans have always had diseases throughout
But don't you
history.
think
We've
we
had
used to eat a lot
cancer in
healthier
ancient
food?
Egyptians. No, dude. Like, that's
You
just
think
how
the food is
that's just
healthier
how
now
reality is.
with less
Like,
chemicals
you
now than it
know,
was 100 years ago?
when everybody ate organic food back in colonial times in America, you had tons of kids because half your kids would die from natural diseases and shit. That's just reality. The reality is the human body absolutely sucks. Nature sucks and is trying to kill us. And more than half of all Americans have a disease that has nothing to do with pharmaceutical conspiracies. And it was even worse in the time periods before pharmaceutical companies even existed. I get that.
Well, isn't it
people want
proven
to
that all the
blame someone.
chemicals in the food are not safe for us?
There have been some chemicals in food that weren't safe, but the net effect actually from like modern foods, and especially with new modern standards of the FDA and the USDA, food now is way more nutritious and safe than it was back in the past. People just used to get dysentery and die from drinking fucking water. Like,
So
it
it's
was
more
so
like
much worse in the
bacteria.
past.
It seems like there was more bacteria and it was less clean in the past. And that seems to make up for a lot of, because everything's much cleaner now.
Well,
with
bacteria
hospitals and
create
stuff.
chemicals and create negative things. It's all chemicals, my man. Like, everything is chemicals. Bacteria is made of chemicals. You are made of chemicals. And the food we eat is made of tons of chemicals with names you can't even pronounce, even when it's 100% natural. There's just chemicals everywhere around us that have very complex interactions with things. And I think that the paranoia surrounding, additives into food, which are very well studied in isolation and, not actually much different from the stuff that's already in food, is largely unfounded. Of course, there have been mishaps throughout history where there's some compounds that aren't safe, right, and aren't good. But we are currently working with compounds that are already in us when it comes to the mRNA vaccines. mRNA exists in your body. You have tons of mRNA in your body. Like, that's how your body works. It creates mRNA from your genes. And the sequences that we use for beta coronaviruses in these COVID vaccines, you already had beta coronavirus spikes in your body well before the vaccine ever came out, well before COVID ever came out, because beta coronaviruses have been with us for millions of years.
So you don't think there's anything wrong with putting extra synthetic spike proteins injecting into you?
I don't think that that's the thing that we should be worrying about if it's proven to be safe. I think that it's a reasonable concern to say, hey, what is this thing that we haven't studied is going to do to us if it isn't studied? But if we have studied it for decades and we have done long-term trials with regards to the other types of, mRNA type vaccines, such as the one from 2014 I mentioned, ERVBO, which is the Ebola vaccine, right? That's an mRNA spike vaccine, and it didn't kill anybody. It was safe. And nobody in the anti-vax community that cares so much about these COVID vaccines has said so much as a peep about this pre-existing mRNA vaccine being quote unquote unsafe. Then I don't see why there's this big hullabaloo specifically about the COVID vaccines, especially when I haven't seen statistically significant proof justifying that these supposed deaths were due to the vaccine. You have to remember that the baseline death rate, even before COVID or the vaccines ever happened in human history, is very large. And thousands of people who appear quote unquote healthy die every day. For you to say that the vaccine is causing deaths, you need to prove that thousands of vaccinated people are dying every day above the baseline. What that means is you expect thousands of vaccinated people to die because thousands of people die anyway without a vaccine. This is an example of salience bias that doesn't properly account for the fact that you have a very high baseline to begin with. And when people say, oh, I know like, dozens or hundreds of people who have died who got the vaccine, that doesn't prove the vaccine is doing anything, because that is what you expect.
That's why you got to look
baseline.
at how the people are doing that don't have the vaccines.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's what we call a control population versus the non-control population, right? And so far, all of the major papers I've read with statistically significant data have shown that there is anywhere from a 13 to 60% effectiveness rate of the vaccine from preventing you from catching COVID compared to the unvaccinated, and in which you actually end up having a lower morbidity rate as well. So I don't know where these claims of the unvaccinated dying less often occur. And I think that a lot of the time what happens is you have a base rate fallacy when it comes to trying to prove that, I know more vaccinated people have died, but if you have more vaccinated people than unvaccinated people, 81% of people are vaccinated, and then you account for the fact that half of all people have chronic disease illnesses, and there should be a lot of vaccinated and unvaccinated people dying, you're going to see more vaccinated people dying in general, even if the vaccine is perfectly safe compared to the unvaccinated. This is what we call a proportional fallacy if you don't end up carefully statistically analyzing the data. It's a very common mistake, well-known mistake that people make in the field of statistics.
Well, interesting thing is I never needed the vaccine,
Well, everybody can say that they don't need a vaccine, right? But that doesn't mean that you understand the actual percent risk, because ultimately dying from COVID, I will grant to you, is, on a scale of 1 to 100, a small risk, right? But in the terms of the micromorts you're adding to your actual life, it's one of the most dangerous things you will ever encounter in your lifetime. If we take, say, 99.8%, which is a number that the anti-vaxxers like to use as, the death rate in healthy people from COVID in general, what you'll end up seeing,
CDC, though?
It's not an accurate understanding of what the real risk is for young people.
No, but
so there is a tiered breakdown of it, and the 99.8% is not necessarily reflective of what will happen to you down the line from other complications from the COVID vaccine that doesn't kill you. I mean, not COVID vaccine, from the COVID virus that would kill you later on. That has nothing to do with the immediate symptoms. So a lot of viruses, they create long-term effects. Polio causes paralysis, right? Even if it doesn't kill you right away, it will cause paralysis, it will damage your brain, and you can die from encephalitis afterwards. And that doesn't necessarily get counted as a direct death from polio. The same thing can happen with something like COVID. And the point is, even with 99.8% survival rate in young people, what you're going to end up seeing is that if you compare the death rate for the most dangerous occupation in America, which is being a logger that cuts down trees, you actually have to spend an entire year to 2 years dodging falling trees around you every single day in the most dangerous job possible to get the same risk of death as 0.2% from the COVID virus. And that's what I mean when I say people don't understand percentage risk. They don't understand the fact that something like 0.2% is insanely dangerous. That's something that's easy for people to misunderstand. And so when you actually put that into perspective around what something that is real risk, like being having the most dangerous job in America, suddenly that 0.2% becomes very scary to think about. So you might say, it's only an 0.2% risk. I don't need the vaccine. I haven't gotten sick for it. I see 100 people around me and none of them are sick. That's because you haven't gotten a sample size that captures the 0.2% risk, which is actually
my
a
analysis
major risk.
is more anecdotal, like talking to people in my real life experience, and running my group and being in other groups and stuff. So you can discount that if you want. I mean, but that's all I have to go on, because I don't have years of schooling and this stuff, and this huge wealth of scientific and mathematical experience that you have. So I have to go based on my real life and people that I've talked to. That to me is real. And in the last 4 years, every single person who I've talked to who's unvaccinated has been completely fine.
I think one of the things you got to realize, though, is you can't talk to people who are dead because, well, they're dead. So you're never going to talk to somebody who was unvaccinated and died, and then they'll be like, I died because I wasn't vaccinated.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing.
If it was so effective, that I would come across someone if it was so effective and if COVID was so dangerous, I would eventually come across some people who didn't have the vaccines and died of COVID.
Yeah, so your expected value to find a single person means you literally got to talk individually with like over 1,000 people.
I have, man.
So
I have. I've talked to so many people, you know.
Right. So let's talk
3
about
years.
what your data means, though, right? So you've talked to
Gotta
many
mean something,
people, right? So if you've talked to many people, but you haven't met the statistical significance thresholds yet, that means that your data is not actually usable to prove anything, because there's a very high likelihood that your data is actually leading you to the wrong conclusion. And that's how math works, right? Like, we can't really argue with math.
It's not, though.
It's true. Like, so the sample proportion test is a key test in statistical significance, where in order to demonstrate that your data is statistically significant, you need to have NP as well as N, open parentheses, 1 minus P, close parentheses, greater than or equal to 10.
I hear you on all the math stuff, but that's not always guaranteed to work, man. You know, math is just a way to explain.
That's a very good criticism. It's not guaranteed to work.
It's not guaranteed anymore.
On the inverse, in the inverse, everything that you're doing is guaranteed to have a high likelihood of being wrong with anecdotal evidence. That's why it's a formal fallacy.
But at least I can prove it in my own,
there's an anecdotal fallacy.
You know.
Yeah, so you can do it in real life. And to be fair, I'm very sympathetic to your worldview in terms of you're doing the best that you can. You're trying to conduct citizen science. The main issue is that the science is not conducted in a correct way, and so it can't actually prove anything. And that's just the unfortunate reality with life and with science in general, which is science is a very hard thing to do, and it has to be done in a specific way for it to actually matter. For us to be able
that's what the
to
advocates for cigarettes
conclusions.
being healthy were saying for a long time too. You know. So.
I understand that's what the advocates for cigarettes were doing for a long time, and I understand that science self-corrects. So you could always
self-corrects, or is it being censored? You know.
Oh, it self-corrects because you can't control the whole world, right? Like, nobody has the ability to censor every single scientific group across the entire world. And the beauty of science is that anyone can do these particular experiments. Like I mentioned to you, it would only cost you about $1,000 to buy your own whole genome sequencer from Minion, from Oxford Nanopore, and then you could sequence the whole genome of a vaccinated person and prove to yourself whether or not this vaccine was getting integrated into their DNA.
That's great, but I mean, that doesn't mean that these vaccines are safe across the board all the time for everybody, you know. But these things.
No, that's not the proof here. What I'm trying to demonstrate to you is that censorship for longer than a couple of years is always impossible, and you can prove this with something like the Windows module proof, right? So there's actually been scientific and mathematical studies of conspiracies and how long they can last, depending on how many people are involved. So
well, it depends who you're paying off too, you know.
Well, yeah, but I can prove to you why this is an issue.
You know?
So let's say there's a probability of P for any given amount of time where a single person who has concrete evidence that's capable of toppling a conspiracy, will betray this conspiracy and leak it to the rest of the world. Let's call that probability, 1 minus P.
Who controls the media? You know, you got to factor that in too, right?
Let's get through this math, because it's a pretty cool conclusion that it's going to lead to, which is the answer to this is going to be, open parentheses, 1 minus P to the nth power, where N is the number of co-conspirators you have. And let's assume all of them have some baseline where they can be incentivized to reveal the conspiracy to their own benefit. What you end up finding, and this is a principle that's found a lot in programming too, and one of the big problems that we have with, say, Windows or Apple OS, where the more you add on to your operating system, and you need each of these individual modules you add to work for the whole thing to work and not collapse in failure and be discovered as like some sort of big problem, you can't sustain it indefinitely. The more modules you add, the faster you go to immediate failure, and the faster you go to mainstream rejection of this particular product or a conspiracy. This is the mathematical reason why it is physically impossible for a conspiracy that involves something like 2,000 people to last for decades. Every single one of these things ends up falling apart within 2 years, and it has been more than 2 years for COVID.
Well, isn't it not proven that the tobacco companies paid off doctors and scientists to?
Oh yeah, it's definitely proven that this happened, but the problem is, as with any conspiracy, the mathematical growth and sustainability of them collapses after about 2 years. And that's basically what we ended up seeing with all of these, companies that were trying to say that their things were safe. right, that had
That
lots of
lasted for a
mainstream
long
rejection
time.
from other doctors.
Cigarette
So the thing
conspiracy,
is
right?
here, we don't see that for the COVID vaccines. Back when there was the cigarette problem, the American Cancer Associations and other, scientists, they heavily disagreed with this at rates that are not at all the same as what you see with the COVID vaccines. So there have been lots of previous things that I don't agree with, real conspiracies that I have, been against.
In
and tried
10
to
years, we can just
down
figure out
for.
that this is one of the same things,
If
Science
this
can
is
be
the thing
bought.
with science,
Science
right?
can be bought by the media,
Well, but the
Science
problem with
can be
mRNA
bought
vaccines
because
is that
it's just,
it wasn't bought by anybody, and it was in fact rejected by mainstream science.
No, I'm saying like
mRNA
the safety
vaccines
of
during the
something.
time, the inventor of mRNA vaccines, Catalin Carrico, she lost her job and her position at her previous employer because she fervently believed that mRNA technology was going to save lives, and they rejected her because they were like, oh, we don't believe that this will ever work. And
Well,
now
it's not
she's
safe
won the
for
Nobel
everyone.
Prize.
And they
It is the
push
same
this
for everyone.
standard. Well, I'm saying like there's no way that these vaccines are safe for 80% of people. But the way they got people to take them is because they held stuff like their jobs, trips, going out, all kinds of stuff over their heads.
We can say that it's safe for 80% of people because we already have that data for pre-existing mRNA
So that
vaccines
means
like
that
the Ebola virus,
that would
which have
mean
been
that
around for
nobody had
9
any.
years in people.
But that would mean that I'm talking about the COVID mRNA vaccine specifically. That would mean that there is no injuries or deaths that are due to the COVID-19 mRNA.
That's not true. Right. So obviously there are real injuries caused by vaccines. And this is one of the things that's difficult for, people to understand right away, but it's a very important concept. So I'm going to explain this, where we need to define what it means for something to be safe. Okay. What does safety mean and what does risk
That's
mean?
pretty obvious.
Nothing you do in your life is free of 100% risk.
Well,
You
if you're a
sitting
healthy
alone,
person, it shouldn't make you less healthy.
that's not what risk means.
No, that's like safety.
There's no
Like if
such
you're a
thing as a
healthy
healthy
person, it
person
shouldn't
that
make you
can't
less.
die randomly the next day.
Oh, of course, right. I'm
There's
saying
no
if it's
such thing.
from the vaccine, if you became less healthy after you got the vaccine, and then nothing else
That's
changed
not what
except you
safety
getting the
means.
vaccine.
What safety means is, does something increase or decrease your relative risk of injury or death? You sitting at home doing nothing, drinking that coffee carries a non-zero risk of death. People who are completely healthy, who've never been vaccinated before, die in the thousands every single day. In 2018, you would need something like 4,600 deaths per day of healthy people to even begin to have a normal baseline of comparison against something like an experimental group like the COVID vaccines. The point is that people constantly die, and if the vaccine is the cause, well, was the vaccine causing this at a rate that raises the relative risk of dying anyway? That's how we assess whether or not something is dangerous. When you walk down the street to go to work, you have a chance of being hit by a car. Walking down the street is something that we generally consider to be relatively safe. It's a normal activity humans do, but it actually carries a significant risk of death. So when we talk about the
people
vaccine,
were coerced to take these shots. That's my main problem.
You should be coerced into taking vaccines, and I'll tell you exactly why. It's because diseases in general throughout history that end up being pandemics kill millions of people. You see something like the Black Death, which killed like 60% of all humanity, right? And so when you see these pandemics that have these death rates that are pretty high, like 0.2%, I explained to you why that's a super high actual risk rate. You want to forcibly vaccinate people if you can. Throughout history, George Washington, for example,
that many people, though, we know that.
George Washington, for example, mandated the very first mandatory vaccination of American citizens and the U.S. Army. Okay, it's been established that it's a constitutional thing to do in the United States, that it's a medically necessary thing to do in the United States throughout history. Zuck v. King, Supreme Court, like Jacobson v. Massachusetts, 1905 Supreme Court case. All of these have done thorough dives on the risk-benefit analysis for humanity and for the individuals actually taking the vaccine, and found that statistically, if you take vaccines, not only are you more safe, but the rest of the population is also more safe. And that is why mandatory vaccines have always been legal and constitutional in the United States for over 100 years, and was even done by the very first president of the United States. And even back then, the vaccines really actually weren't safe. They're safe today, but the very first inoculation.
Well, they were probably telling everyone it was
considerably
safe.
more dangerous.
They were probably telling everyone it was safe back then.
No, they knew it wasn't safe back then, and they didn't tell people it was safe. We
why
knew
would
that
they do
people
that?
died at a pretty decent rates from cowpox inoculation, but it actually was, quote unquote, better, depending on how you analyze the situation.
So if I had
better
taken the COVID
because
vaccine and it injured me or killed me, so I could keep my job, how do you figure that?
how do we
When
figure
I'm
this?
sitting, like I'm sitting here totally safe, never took a COVID vaccine.
Well, you're
never
not
had
totally
COVID.
safe sitting here, right? There's
I'm
no
saying
such thing
I'm
as
safe
totally
from the
safe.
COVID vaccine because I didn't take it. That's what I'm saying.
So you want to be safe from a specific amount of risk, right? And so a rational person, the way that we approach things would be, what risks am I willing to take in my general life that make the most sense
willing
to
to take the
protect
risk
me
of
to the
getting
maximum
COVID
amount?
because I never seen it hurt anybody who was healthy. You know?
Well, you've never seen it, but I, am a surgeon, and I have plenty of doctor friends, and I have seen them completely overwhelmed with tons of dead people in the hospital.
Well, I got to
COVID.
see it.
That
I got to
doesn't
see
be
it
a thing.
myself. You know, I
Well,
have to see COVID as a scary thing for a
Okay.
healthy person. For me to
So
inject
from your
myself
perspective, right, you
with something that
basically
someone else
haven't
wants to
seen the
inject.
evidence for yourself. But then
Yeah.
if you haven't seen the evidence for yourself, the rational thing to do in terms of order of considerations of logic is to say, I don't know the answer. It's not to make the alternative conclusion for which you also don't have enough evidence.
Well, it turns out
We
I'm right
should-
so far for myself.
Well, you haven't proven that you're right to me, at least through, the hours of conversation we had through DMs leading up to this.
No, I'm saying
You need
like
to be
I've
able to
never
prove
had
to me
COVID
statistically
and
significant.
I'm still healthy. You know.
Well, you've never had COVID because you're still healthy, but that is something
No,
that's pretty
and I'm
easy
still
because
healthy.
and you're still healthy, and that's something that
Yeah.
we would expect some people to experience because not everybody in the U.S. has even caught COVID yet, right? Like, what's the number of people that has caught COVID? I think it's something like half or something at the moment where they know they have gotten COVID and gotten it confirmed that they caught COVID. So it's very likely that you would just happen to luckily fall into
Not only
the group of
that,
people
but
that haven't
I
caught
did
it.
the opposite of everything that you were supposed to do for the first 3 years.
Yeah. And that's totally
I did the
a thing that
opposite.
can happen. Yeah, that's something that can totally happen.
Whatever
where
they
you
told me
don't
to
follow
do, I
any
did
of
the
these, you
opposite.
don't vaccinate,
They said
and you
stay
still
home,
end up
go
not
on.
catching COVID because that's
Yeah.
just how probability and luck work. Some people get unlucky. A lot of people got unlucky. Some people got very lucky. And that's just the beauty of statistics, where sometimes the less likely events end up happening, and sometimes the more likely events don't happen specifically to you. But that doesn't mean that it's not a intelligent thing for each and every individual to operate within their best interests of statistics. It never plays to bet against the house in terms of statistics, even if you played against it and somehow ended up fine. That's not a good way to operate in life. But with regards to what you said earlier about the relative risk here, you need to make sure that you satisfy the burden of proof. Positive statements, a claim that has an underlying assumption, needs to have conclusive evidence in order for you to make that claim. The opposite of it, which is a rejection, never requires that. In logic, we call this a burden of proof. Okay. And so burden of proof does not go equally in both ways. If you say that, the vaccines are killing people, you need to provide the data that proves this, because the assumption here is that the virus has some sort of mechanism that is doing that. And you can't assume that something exists until you prove it exists. I can't say there's a flying teacup in space and then just assume that is true. I need to prove that there's a flying teacup in space. And it is perfectly rational and logical for somebody else, when I make this claim, to say, prove it to me, otherwise we can just safely assume that it doesn't exist. So right now, you saying that the vaccines are killing people requires this conclusive, statistically significant proof in order for you to actually be able to claim that.
Well, I can't tell you how many people were healthy before they took these vaccines, and they're no longer healthy, and they didn't change anything else, so.
Well, we would expect half the people who took the vaccine to not be healthy because half of Americans are not healthy to begin with. And we would expect and we would expect 4,600 people who are vaccinated to die every single day to begin with, even if the vaccine did literally nothing harmful, because that's just the death rate in America.
How many people died or are permanently injured strictly from the vaccines who would have been fine?
Yeah, so that's a very good question, and that's something that we should analyze, right? So when we take a look at the VAERS data, for example, which is a pretty good proxy because it's reporting everybody who had any sort of reaction, we find that fewer people have, reactions immediately preceding it. that
are
end
you
up
willing
being attributable,
to
at least even partially
say?
attributable without a confounding factor. So that specific number that I got from
I'm not-
2022, after I personally analyzed the VAERS data, was around 83 people who had died that didn't seem to have confounding factors that could be attributable as the real cause. And maybe those 83 people died from the COVID vaccine, maybe they didn't. It's not provable with
So
that
you
amount
don't
of
know.
data
You
and no
don't know if
biomarkers to know.
anybody. So you don't know if anybody.
No, I
So
know.
you're
I know
saying,
of a person who's been injured from the COVID vaccine. I have a friend in the UK
okay.
who is a really great neuroscientist guy, does machine learning, and he ended up getting myocarditis, which is a real negative, event from the vaccine. He's got
So he
medical
would have been
receipts and
better
everything
off
to prove
not
it.
getting him.
No, I don't think so, because his myocarditis is still just a transient inflammation event, and it goes away on its own. He's vaccinated, protected against COVID. The myocarditis
So
didn't
it's worth to
necessarily
get
hurt him permanently.
myocarditis.
What?
Myocarditis doesn't heal though, right? It's a scarring of the heart, isn't that right?
No, it heals. Myocarditis can heal. Myocarditis is
Does
really
it?
just an inflammation event around the heart, and it has different degrees. You can have a severe grade, or you can have a light grade. And the majority of myocarditis events actually resolve once the inflammation goes away. So it's not
Myocarditis is
all.
no big deal, you're saying?
Some myocarditis is a big deal. In his case, his was transient, and he took some corticosteroids, and he's doing better now.
How about someone who had bad myocarditis?
Someone who had bad myocarditis
Yeah.
clearly had a negative reaction, and they're worse off for having taken that
So
particular vaccine.
So how do you justify that then?
The way we justify it is you're making a logical fallacy known as hindsight, right? The hindsight
But what if
fallacy
you were
says,
that person, man? What if you were that
if
person?
you were that person, even
how would
if
you
you
feel?
got it afterwards, before, when you didn't know what was going to happen, statistically, it still makes sense for you to take the
That's
vaccine.
crazy, man. That's crazy.
Yeah, I know hindsight fallacies sound
really
crazy
crazy.
to normal human intuition, but you
That's
can go
really-
anywhere. You can go
That's really
anywhere to any
disgusting,
smart
though.
person in the world and ask them about hindsight fallacy, and they will tell you you are wrong about this logically. Any person in the world who knows anything about hindsight fallacies will tell you that's not the right way to think
You can
about
say all the
probability and risk.
statistical stuff you want. It's still really messed up for someone who was healthy that was trying to protect themselves and others to
Yeah,
now have a
definitely.
serious
It's totally
heart
messed up
problem
that we live in a
when
world where,
totally
sometimes there's
fine
real
before.
vaccine injuries and people get hurt. I agree
Yeah,
that
I think no
the
vaccine
world is that
injuries.
way.
I don't think that anyone should ever have a vaccine injury, especially not from the COVID-19 vaccine, because a lot of people didn't even want to
we could live
get
in a
it.
world where we perfect medicine like this, but the truth of the matter is every single safe medical intervention in the world that saves lives every day, that is worth it for people to engage in, ends up carrying risk.
Yeah, and
There is
they're a
no such
choice.
thing as I mentioned as
It's a
zero
choice,
risk.
though. This
The
wasn't really a
answer
choice for a
is
lot of people, It wasn't a
the
choice.
answer to
That's
this
the
question
problem.
is whether or not, the risk is higher than a baseline normal safety profile. Is it safer than walking down the street? And if it's safer than walking down the street, it's fine for it to be mandated because it saves lives. The big picture problem here.
That's easy for you to say because you didn't get myocarditis from the vaccine.
I've gotten
It's
negative
easy-
reactions
It's
from
easy for you to
medical
say.
procedures.
I don't think that.
I wouldn't say so because, I'm a person who has had negative reactions to drugs before. That doesn't mean I turn around and make the illogical conclusion with hindsight fallacy that, engaging in these medical interventions was a net bad thing. That's just not how risk
It
and
wasn't
probability
even
work
most
at a
people's
logical level.
choice, though.
So here's the problem, right? Is that people are worried about their potential health. But we know that there is at least 99.8% survival rate of COVID, which means that there's a very high death rate out there for the general population. And when it comes to the people's human rights and what people are allowed to do in order to protect themselves, people's rights have to be balanced against other people's rights, right? So you can't go into the street and exercise your Second Amendment rights and just shoot randomly because it endangers other people's lives. So when it comes to a vaccine and viruses, if you do not vaccinate yourself, you are killing other people. And if you don't vaccinate yourself and end up becoming a vector that kills other people, that's you evaluating your freedom of your body over their freedom to life. And the rights to somebody's body is less important than somebody's right to live. What's up?
You could never even prove that, though. If someone
You can
killed
definitely
someone else
prove
from
that
COVID.
because we understand how epidemiological tracing is done. Even in the
never
1800s, we
prove
had
that.
people like John Snow doing tracing that could prove where different pathogens spawn from. We can
No
do
one's ever
contact
been
tracing.
no one's ever been held accountable for killing someone from COVID.
Yeah, they have. Yeah,
Never
the people in
happened.
Korea who violated the lockdown laws got in huge trouble for spreading it to other countries. Yes, they did. People have been held
Korea,
accountable for doing this.
not in America. No one's ever been to jail for killing
Well,
someone.
we
from
have
COVID.
Americans. America has a really shitty society sometimes that's split down the middle politically, and we have people who completely don't comply with laws. We have entire
Do you realize what a
states where
slippery
where
slope
people
that
don't
is to
believe in
say you
science.
killed him from COVID because you sneezed on him, and now you're going to
Oh
jail?
yeah,
Like,
dude. If a
dude,
person
that's
got
so
COVID,
ridiculous.
brought it back to their whole family got it afterwards, and someone in their family died, we can point the finger to that specific person as, you brought this back to your family and you killed grandma.
Dude,
Yes,
that's
you can
literally a
definitely say
witch.
that.
That's literally a witch hunt. That's what. That's the opposite of what
Not
America
if it's
is
proven by
supposed to stand
science through
against.
contact tracing. Contact tracing works. It's worked ever
Are you
since the
from
Middle
Are you
Ages.
from an Asian country? Are you from China or Korea or something?
No, dude, I'm born and raised
Are you
in the
American?
US. I am American.
Are you?
Should be obvious. I don't have an accent.
Dude, we stand for very different things, man. That's crazy. It's really wild.
Founding fathers believed that the Constitution should be rewritten every couple of generations. Thomas Jefferson himself said that. The idea that some people have, because they haven't read their history books, that our rights are immutable things that should never change and the Constitution is good forever, is literally at odds with what most of the founding fathers actually thought about the Constitution. I believe that humans should be protected, that we should have freedoms, but I don't believe in absolutes that are formed from a non-scientific basis. It's obvious to me that something like free speech isn't absolute, which is why you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. There are limits to what you can do once it directly starts to threaten another person's life.
So what is it that gives someone myocarditis from the vaccine? How does the vaccine
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that I'm happy to answer. So with regards to immune systems in general, like I mentioned, the immune system is an absolute piece of shit, right? It's completely random in terms of the way that it generates immunity to different antigens.
I think it's an amazing thing, actually.
Yeah, but if you were where I was studying the immune system for over 15 years, you'd probably also think it's a piece of shit. The immune system, like I said, operates through...
I'll never agree with you on that.
Ever. Okay, well, how do you think the immune system develops immunity to things?
I think
explain how it works.
I think it's an incredible God-created, divinely created system that protects people all day, every day from death.
Okay, well, if that's what you think, then prove it to me. Tell me how you think the immune system works to create immunity.
Just look at me.
If you don't know how it does it, how can you say for certain that you know it's a beautiful thing that works so well?
Because I'm alive and well without any COVID or COVID vaccines. I have a great immune system.
60% of Americans have a chronic disease that they die and suffer from.
Yeah, because they treat their body wrong. They're doing something wrong.
Tons of healthy people with healthy biomarkers drop dead randomly, even without a COVID vaccine, and years without COVID or these COVID vaccines. You've never seen them, but these death rates are everywhere. And it's not from some shady government conspiracy. It's from third parties all over the world, not even just the US, even from other countries. They show a pretty high death rate and a pretty high constitutive
Never seen a healthy,
rate.
unvaccinated person die from COVID.
You've never seen it, and yet there are dozens of news reports of people who didn't get the vaccine and were healthy and died from COVID. There's even bodybuilders who were in the peak of their health who were competing that died from COVID. The fact of the matter is, unvaccinated, yes.
Never seen
this is a thing. I mean, have you not seen this?
All I've seen is people who are vaccinated for COVID that die from COVID.
All right, let me find you the name of a guy. Super athlete, refuses vaccine, dies tragically. From Changing America, John Ayers, British bodybuilder, very healthy, age 42, no pre-existing conditions, died of the COVID virus. Like, this is an example of a healthy person with no pre-existing conditions that died of COVID-19 and didn't get the vaccine. So what do you say to a person like that, who's a real person, very famous, and his family like corroborates the story? This is the person who died of COVID. That is well known.
He must have been doing something else that was unhealthy.
How can you claim that without proof? That's not how proof works, dude.
I just don't believe it because...
So you don't believe it. That's the key here. Your skepticism based on absolutely no real logic is what's driving it.
This is what we call a bias.
That's what we call a bias.
Based on my own personal experience in life, though.
That is what we call a logically fallacious bias.
That's fine, but it's kept me safe, though. You know?
What's kept you safe is being lucky. Just like the half of all people who haven't gotten COVID yet. Yeah. That's pretty good luck. You had a 50% chance of not getting COVID without doing any of the things you're supposed to. Isn't that great? That's how it is. And yet, not doing this still has considerably raised your chance of death and dismemberment or maiming because you didn't follow it. Because a 50% chance of catching it and a 99.8% death rate is one of the most dangerous things you can possibly encounter compared to
99.8% survival rate.
99.8% survival rate is hugely dangerous. Yes. To accumulate that amount of risk, like I mentioned, you need to work as a logger, dodging trees around you for a year to 2 years straight. Do you want to become a logger and dodge giant falling trees for 2 years straight around heavy machineries and saws? Do you want to do that? Would you think that's safe to do? Would you do that? It has the highest death rate of any occupation in the U.S.
There's no way that COVID is that dangerous. There's just no possible way.
That's what a 99.8% survival rate means. That's how dangerous 99.8 is. And that's why people who don't have a background in math and science don't understand risk.
To the average healthy person. So are you saying that all the people, all the millions of people that are claiming that they were injured from the COVID vaccine are all lying or delusional?
I think that these people probably genuinely believe something like this, but unless you're somebody who understands how to analyze your own medical data, how are you going to be able to prove this? There's going to be thousands of people.
I don't really need to prove it, though.
That's how everything works in the world, my man. You have to prove everything before you can claim it's true. That's just how logic works. You can't just suddenly say, I'm going to decide to be illogical and then everybody should believe me and that I'm right. That's not how being right
I believe certain people and I don't believe others, you know? That's the thing
about it. And what made you decide which to believe based off of what particular
It's called intuition.
Intuition is wrong half the time. People go into the desert and they think they see something in the distance, and yet it's a mirage because the heat wave distorted what they saw in the distance.
Actually,
if you go and look at studies of people's intuitions about guessing different things that will happen or trying to see what's in front of them with their eyes closed, nobody gets that shit right because human intuition is ultimately completely crap. Have you ever tried to use
have intuition that is correct most of the time?
Have you ever gone into school and taken a math test and tried to do it entirely on intuition without studying? How did you do? I bet you would have done really badly.
It doesn't really work with those kind of things. It doesn't work with certain things.
And science and vaccines and epidemiology is one of those things that is math heavy. It is like a math test, and intuition does not work with it. You cannot do something like that. If you can't go into school and do basic math tests of like high school level math with pure intuition without studying for months on end to learn the class material and do well, you definitely cannot do it with vaccines because vaccines are an even more complex topic requiring decades of study to understand. I mean, the parallels here should be fairly obvious why you can't do that with vaccines.
No, but I can do it with people who are saying that they're injured and died from after they get the vaccine.
You can do it at a statistically insignificant level that doesn't prove anything conclusively according to how logic and math are supposed to work.
It's okay because
what value does that have?
Andy,
it's okay.
You know a lot more people who are supposedly vaccine injured because you seek them out also, because you run this group and you are looking for people intentionally to talk to on that subject.
No, they found me actually.
Yeah, and you have what?
Yeah, they found
like
you. They found you because you're a magnet for it because you're talking on these issues.
Well, yeah, because that's the subject that I
yeah, but what if your topic, your Facebook group is all about people who lost loved ones to COVID?
Yeah, so what Kyle is getting to
I would
here
say that
is
almost
the fact
all of them
that
have serious comorbidities then.
So
yeah, so you shrug them off when they know their truth, but we're supposed to accept your truth and not theirs based on their intuitions.
Well,
so one of the things that
a lot of those people who got injured from the vaccines, they didn't want to take them in the first place. So that's the main difference.
That's a different point. I understand what you're saying there, but we get
they didn't want to
argue that not everyone was forced to take it. Lots of people were forced to take it. Lots of people's jobs were at risk.
No
but
one
not
should
everyone.
have been forced to take it. That's my main thing. So that's what separates
how
I feel about
don't try and shrug off the fact that you think that these things are evil death shots,
No, it doesn't matter what they are. No one should be forced to take it. It doesn't matter.
So let's go back to what Kyle was saying.
Really matter what
in regards to being a magnet for people who
fucking heroin. No one should be forced to take it or lose their job or not be allowed to get on a plane.
That's acceptable. I don't completely disagree with you on that. I don't completely disagree with you on that, but I want to hear
let's go back to what Kyle was trying to drive at, which is, the selecting of the groups right, which attracts a certain amount of people. So you have 4,500 people there, right? The death rate in 2018 of people who'd never been vaccinated was already at 4,600 people a day. Your group alone, even if every single one of these people was truly injured, is not enough to prove that the vaccine.
Yeah, but there's thousands upon thousands of the groups just like mine.
And I would say that if you want to prove the point, that would be great. But what you would have to do is you would actually have to make the spreadsheet, tally up these people, and then present your case at a well-described level. You can't just hand wave at, there's theoretically these thousands of people that I'm aware of, but then never present that as a data package.
You know what I mean? They're there.
If they're there, you should be able to prove it by generating a spreadsheet of this and demonstrating the statistical significance.
Dude, just look it up, man. All you gotta do is look up the groups. Just type in
if that's all you gotta do, you should be able to, after months of running this group, have already generated a paper that proves this. The fact that you haven't means that either you're too lazy to prove your own point, or that it's just not there. Why are we supposed to take your imaginary evidence that I don't see in front of me as more real than mine?
You can do it yourself, man. There's thousands of groups just like that.
That's the thing. I did it.
It's not on him to prove your theory.
It's not on me. It's on me to prove his theory.
And I did that. I went through the VAERS database, which contains all of these people who claim that they have been injured and who have filed their injury, and I analyzed 174,000 people. And that's only like 1%
of them. That's such a tiny percent of them.
And that is a statistically significant percentage that is representative of the population, because that's how statistics works. And I found 83 people who were injured that had no pre-existing comorbidities.
It's only 83
and even those 83 people couldn't be proven to actually have been mechanistically hurt by the vaccine.
So how many?
I already have that data. I actually sent you the link to my VAERS spreadsheet data in our DMs. Okay, so it's there. I actually did the work because I sent it to you, of 174,000 people, in which there were 83 people that could have been injured by the vaccines directly.
So it could be zero.
As the only cause.
Is what you're saying.
So what?
So it could be zero that have been killed or affected negatively.
No, I don't think it's zero. I definitely
so
want
what do you
to
think
represent
it is,
the science
then?
right here.
What do you think
I think it's probably something like 83 or lower out of like 174,000. That's what the data says. And this is from people who actually want to claim that they are being hurt and have reported it publicly. Like, these are people who are in your groups who have filed these reports. Like, you can read them. I even sent you screenshots of what they said when they sent them. One of them was a grandma, and she said, "My son died, leaving behind 2 beautiful children. Why did he have to take the shot?" Like, these are real people, just like the ones in your group, filing in their complaints, and yet it's still not statistically significant.
Have died or been injured from the COVID vaccines in America
in 2022, and probably less than that. 83% of people out of 174,000.
Okay, so how many out of everyone that's got the COVID vaccine, mRNA vaccine, in America?
It's going to be more than that, obviously, per year.
What do you think it is?
I'm not going to quote the number off of it that I haven't directly analyzed myself, because unlike you, I am very careful with the exact data I present. That has to be directly provable.
Is it more than 83? That have been
probably more than 83, but it's not going to be like crazy amounts like you suggested. Like, some people in your group were saying millions have died from the vaccine. That's obviously not true. You can scale it based off of how long the vaccine's been out, how many countries it's been deployed, and how many people have been vaccinated, and then just use a rough, proportional examination of 83 out of 174.
Well, 83 is too many for me, man. That's too many for me, buddy.
83 is one of the safest things you can encounter in life. It's safer than walking down the street.
Because it was mandated to everybody, okay?
Then you should say that anything else that has higher risk than that is something people shouldn't be mandated to do.
No, so that's what I said.
So people shouldn't be mandated to walk down the street. People shouldn't be mandated.
No, they're not. They're not.
Like, go to work.
What do you mean?
It's pretty much mandated to work and to make money. It is, because they're also be homeless, and so it's the same thing as you're saying the mandates. Where you're saying that. You're saying the
mandates to register their vehicle at the DMV and get a driver's license
because they take the vaccine.
Those are all choices. They're all choices.
There's not that many choices. You don't have a choice not to pay taxes, dude.
It's a choice not to work at the place that is mandating a vaccine. It's a choice.
If you work at a job, you are choosing to work at that job. Making sure that you don't become a disease vector and kill your coworkers is something that you would have to agree to be given the option to work
Not
at a job.
necessarily,
If you choose not to work at a job because of the vaccine, that's your choice. If you choose to work at a job, you choose to accept that your employer has certain things they want you to do, such as working or making sure that you don't kill your coworkers.
But you could have already been working there for a long time, and that never came up. You know,
What difference
That's
does that
coming
make?
up in all sorts of fields, even
because
before the
it's
COVID
just
pandemic.
not fair. You know,
Andy,
It's not
you
fair
have
to
to
the people
work
you
to
get
eat.
killed.
You have to
even
work
more
to
than it's
eat.
not fair to you.
You have
That's
to
the
work
point.
to survive and take care of your family. And in order to work,
Of
you have to
course.
be able to drive in the car. You have to be able to walk. You have to
That's
be able to
not
do all
true.
these things that have so much risk every day.
that's not true at all.
You don't?
Look, 1,900 people walking to work or walking around died last year just from walking on the street. Walking on the street doesn't have non-zero risk. The point is, when you have 83 or less out of 174,000, that is safer than walking down the street. And the figure of 1,900 people dying walking down the street.
I don't
last
agree
year.
with that figure at all, though.
Okay, well, if you don't agree
At
with
all.
that figure, present to me statistically significant data that you have analyzed mathematically to prove your point in a way that is logical.
Everything you're saying is going to be disproven in the next 2 years, so I don't really have to
You
do
can't
anything.
prove to hypotheticals that
You
don't
can just
exist
all you have
as
to
if
do
you're
is
making
just wait,
sense.
and you'll see. It's fine. All you have to
So
do is
if
just
your
wait, and
reply
you'll
to
see what
things
happens.
is wait and you'll see, even though I have no
Yeah.
actual evidence collated here, then you're basically trying to be a prophet and supernatural in the way that you
I am a
approach
prophet.
analyzing things.
You're right.
What?
I am a prophet. Yeah, absolutely. I can see things that a lot of people can't see, like you.
So you just think you're smarter than everybody else then?
I'm smarter than you. Absolutely.
And what makes you say you're smarter than everybody else? What's your IQ? Have you
I
had it
wouldn't say
tested?
everybody. I wouldn't say everybody else, but a lot of people.
All right, let me reveal something. My IQ is 134, and I have degrees from Harvard and Caltech, and I've invented 3 different patents. Okay, I've
That
won
doesn't mean
championships in multiple different fields.
It means
I
nothing.
seriously doubt that someone like you, who's just a musician and who doesn't understand basic statistical significance and how burden of proof logic works, is smarter than all of these other scientists. I think it takes a lot of hubris and narcissism to believe that.
Into
I
intelligence.
don't even think I know everything in the world, or that I'm better than most people. And yet here you are claiming to be a literal prophet. That's never something that I would do, despite all of my qualifications.
That's fine, because I know things that for some reason, someone who's so smart like you just can't seem to accept. You know?
What have you done in terms of all the predictions you've made in your life and tracking how many of them have come true and how many have not come true? Have you actually analyzed your prediction success rate to yourself in a way that is kept in a diary that's objective? Or are you just saying that, sometimes things I predict get right and then follow those as if they are the only things you've ever predicted on? That's the salience bias.
I knew that the COVID vaccines were unnecessary and would hurt and kill millions of people before they came out.
You claim that it's necessary, and yet you still haven't disagreed with me with the 99.8%
No, it's
survival
unnecessary.
rate.
I'm saying it's unnecessary.
If 99.8% is the survival rate, yes, it's necessary, because that's one of the most dangerous things a human will encounter in general. And yes, we should stop that because it kills millions of people, which is equivalent and worse than dropping multiple nuclear bombs on the United States.
Way
If
more
we don't
people
want to
have died
stop
from the
multiple
COVID
nuclear
vaccines
bombs
than
or multiple holocausts in terms of death and suffering,
Mhm.
what good is anything we do, period? If that's not necessary, what could possibly ever be necessary for humanity to band together
In the next
to do anything?
in the next 5 years, the COVID vaccines will be proven beyond a doubt that they're the most dangerous things that ever happened to humanity.
Okay, so what you're doing right now is a
Guaranteed.
debate technique called counterclaiming, where you simply claim a given point, but you don't back it up with an actual evidence claim.
Well,
In
the thing is, you're so
argumentation,
biased that everything that it's safe and it's worth it. That doesn't matter what I say.
but I'm using
You're still
statistics
you're
that I
still gonna
actually
go with
analyze
whatever
myself,
math and
which
statistics.
are
That's fine.
objective and replicatable by
That's fine.
anyone
I don't even
else.
believe any of your statistics are even true.
You don't
I don't
believe
even
in math.
I don't even believe the 99.8% and that number. That's just a CDC number. I don't actually believe that.
That's even the number that most anti-vaxxers who are extreme will
That's
quote.
fine.
Like,
I'm not most anti-vaxxers.
you're even more
man.
extreme than these people
I'm
who are
not most
already
anti-vaxxers.
extreme. And even
I'm
then,
the most extreme guy you'll ever meet. Ever.
I don't mean
I don't
to
believe
make light of this. I understand that you're
anything
coming from
the
a place where you
CDC.
genuinely believe you are doing the right thing, and that's something that's
Of course.
obviously great. We're clearly both two people who are passionate about this subject, who really believe that we want to make a difference here. I just think that it's unfortunate
I
that
don't
your
want to call
efforts are
myself a
necessarily
prophet,
wrong.
but when you say intuition doesn't mean anything, where does that leave me? You know, because that's the main thing that I work on is my own intuition.
You know, I have worked in the lab for a decade and a half, and I have often had intuitions about things. And many times I'm right, many times I'm wrong. But what ends up happening most of the time is when I do an experiment and I get some, say, initial results where things seem like they're working, and then I do another experiment and then I disprove my own intuition. I realize that human intuition is, in general, is fallacious, and that no matter what we do, we have to do things in a very statistically significant way. We cannot always rely on our intuitions because it can be wrong. If you've ever been wrong on a question on a math test, you know that your intuition is fallible. Have you ever gotten a question wrong on a math test?
I don't really care about math that much. I really don't. I don't think I've ever passed a math test.
You're talking about statistics, which is math. Have you gotten a question wrong on a math test?
I don't really care about statistics.
Well, just answer yes or no if you don't care about it. Have you
I've never even passed a math test, I don't think.
If you've never passed a math test and you've gotten lots of math wrong in your life, how can you say you're right about the math here? Because clearly your intuition doesn't work for math.
Math is just a man-made language that tries to explain.
That's actually incorrect. What we experience. If you actually had more education in math, you'd realize that mathematics is not a man-made language. Arithmetic is actually based off of first principles of observing the universe. Principia Mathematica is based on observations of nature from which mathematical language that we use today is inspired.
It's not necessary.
Math itself is not actually man-made. It is not. This is a big misunderstanding a lot of uneducated people have about mathematics. Mathematics is derived from the example of I have one apple, I put another apple next to it, I have two apples. I do this infinite number of times, and now I can prove to myself 1 + 1 = 2. We do this, and we build all of math. We go from that to arithmetic. We go from arithmetic to calculus. We go from calculus into infinitesimals. We go from infinitesimals to differential equations. Differential equations, which you never learned, and which actually govern infection rates under the SIR model of virology. These are math things that you clearly failed to understand that actually are relevant for properly understanding things that your intuition has clearly demonstrated to fail at understanding in your life.
Are you going to keep showing up for all your new boosters, for every new COVID shot you get?
Yeah, of course. I've already been showing up for all my boosters every year for my flu shot. Why would I not do that for COVID? For any virus
we'll have to have this debate, and we'll have to have this debate again in 1 year, 2 years.
Look, I've already had 6 shots. If something was going to happen to me, it would have happened by now. I was a vaccine trial volunteer for the AstraZeneca trials. I've taken Moderna vaccine. I've taken the Pfizer vaccine. I take all the voluntary vaccines. I worked in hematology, which meant that I absolutely had to be vaccinated against all bloodborne diseases because I would be exposed to them from patient samples.
Yo, Kyle, are you going to show up for all your new boosters?
I mean, no, I don't. But you know, it has nothing to do with it. It doesn't mean I believe a certain thing about it.
You don't need it anymore?
It's not that I don't need it. I've never taken flu shots in my life. It's just a personal choice. I just
I'm saying the new COVID boosters.
I took the first round and that's it. I just haven't taken the other ones. I just haven't thought about it. I'm just too lazy to go to the freaking hospital to even do it. I don't feel need to.
It's not even necessary.
And so one of the things that
doesn't mean I'm discrediting what he's saying at all. It doesn't mean that I think there's
still
some sort
being
of
pushed as a necessary thing.
Huh?
They're pushed as a necessary thing because of the 99.8% death rate, right? Or higher.
Well, Kyle and
higher than that.
They gave up on
I'm just using that number to simplify things because it's the number commonly accepted by anti-vaxxers. When you have a number like that, the end result in deaths is greater than multiple nuclear bombs. And that's why it's necessary to prevent something like that.
0.000000001% actually.
And where are you getting that number from? How are you proving this number? Is your intuition so good that it can predict this exact number despite the fact that you fail math tests? How does that compute? Can you explain that to your followers?
I'm just guessing.
So you're guessing, even though your guesses at math in school were bad.
It's an intuitive
and you claim that you're definitely right here. Can you understand why that doesn't make sense? Like you're like, I think everybody here can understand why what you're saying about your math skills
Kyle
doesn't make sense.
Everyone else should keep showing up for all their shots. Go ahead. If it's so necessary and so
You
safe,
think
go
that's
ahead.
insane,
But
and
keep
yet for
showing up.
hundreds of years, people have always done this with vaccines and vaccines boosters, and it's
Keep showing
constantly
up.
worked, and
You
it's
should preach to
eradicated
Kyle then.
diseases.
You should preach to Kyle then, because he's not showing up just like me. We're not
Yeah, but
showing up.
Andy,
He's already
we're not
gotten
here
the
about- we're
vaccine.
not
I don't
here
need to
about
preach
us
to
not showing
him.
up. We're here about what you think the shot is and what it
So
isn't.
not every shot is doing that, but some of them are very dangerous. Not every single one.
Yeah, because I don't know what to call you, mRNA guy. Andy believes that it's like, oh, there are placebos out there, and the only reason that maybe I didn't get sick from the vaccine is because
You just got a water
placebo.
shot.
It's the way for the government to kind of cover it up, because
It's not a
they show that
placebo,
some
and I
people
know
are
for a
healthy.
fact that it's. It's not a placebo, and I know for a fact because I've been inside the Moderna manufacturing facilities. Moderna is actually
just because you've seen a few of them, or 10
like,
of them, or 1,000, doesn't mean that there's not.
No, dude, I actually know how this stuff is made. I make mRNAs, myself.
Okay, then you're gonna
the
keep showing
QC
up for your
process,
new
deployment
shots.
process.
You're
They're
gonna keep
not
showing up
water
for your new
shots,
shots,
and
man. You're
I'm an
not gonna last
insider
that
who
long.
knows this because I've seen it and I've worked with it. The idea
Okay,
that
you
it's a
haven't
water
seen every
water
single
shot
dose
is
of
like.
COVID vaccine.
I actually have seen all of the doses of the initial COVID vaccine that went out, and I know the people who make these
6
things.
billion doses. Right.
That like I don't understand how somebody could think this if they're involved in the process, and I've just literally seen the vaccines being made in front of me, and I know what goes into them. I know how they're made. like I don't understand how somebody who has no involvement in the process could possibly claim this obviously ridiculous thing that they're placebo water shots. Like,
Some
where are
of
you
them
getting
are,
this idea
not
from?
all of them.
But where are you
Because
getting this
some-
idea even from?
Because some people are still healthy after they've gotten the shots.
Oh, so that's what you're saying. It's because people are healthy
Yeah.
after they got it, not because you've actually observed that there's water inside these shots and nothing else. That's not good thinking, dude. That's not logic.
Well, neither is yours, thinking that they're all. That there's no
You've answered one assumption. You've tried to justify one assumption by introducing a second unjustified
That's
assumption.
exactly what you did.
built a
when you
house
said
of
that you-
cards
that you-
out of
that you
unjustified
saw all
assumptions
the-
that rely upon each other with no actual proof for any of them to
That's
begin with.
exactly what you did. You haven't seen every COVID shot.
No, I have. I have seen all the COVID shots that went out in the
Analyze
first round.
every single dose.
Yeah, dude, it's not that hard. That's what companies do when we make mRNA. You know how we analyze these things to make sure that they're clean?
You analyze every
make a
vial.
giant batch. You make a giant batch of the mRNA, right? You have a giant batch of it. You take that mRNA, you run it through an FPLC or HPLC machine in order to get its UV profile to see what's actually inside of it based off of the light refraction properties. Okay, you can do a purification process with SDVB, and once you do that with the polymer columns, and they pass through, you can take the resulting mRNA and you can analyze it for endotoxins with endotoxin screens that attach to protein and to sugar in order to quantify how much is in there. And you can then also pass it through a LCMS machine. An LCMS machine is something that vaporizes whatever you put into it, and then it shoots it at the magnet basically and into a detector, and then based off of how much electric charge, based off the chemical properties of something, you can tell what's inside of it. It's a common method used everywhere.
Monitored every
All of
single
this stuff
vial
was
that's
done.
gone into every single person.
Every single batch has been QC'd this way.
Every
Yes.
batch. There can't be
Every
any
single
batches
mRNA
that
batch
are
has been
just
QC'd this way.
water
You're literally
or
not
saline.
allowed to even send out something that has not been QC'd in these ways. Yes. That's what you don't understand, dude. I know how this is done because I've been there and I've done it.
Well,
Your
then you're a
ideas of
prophet,
how
'cause you
things work
monitored
are
all
based
6
off of
billion
nothing, and you haven't been
You're a
there.
prophet
So
too.
where are you getting these ideas from?
He's calling you
saw
a prophet
some random
too.
post
He's
from
saying you're
some
a
random
prophet
Also a
too.
person
prophet.
that
He's
there's
monitored
placebo
6 billion
shots.
doses. Yeah.
He's saying that you're a prophet too. Andy, there's a difference between being a prophet and doing the work and looking at something. You're
doesn't know that,
prophet
though.
is somebody
He
trying to
doesn't know
predict
that
something
for
that
sure.
you can't.
What do you mean I
see.
don't know
doesn't
that?
know
You
that.
can't say I don't know
You
that.
don't
I
know
know
that.
that because I was there.
You did not see all 6 billion doses that went into people's arms.
Andy,
I was there for the manufacturing design process. I
That's
was there
fine.
for the outsourcing
That's fine. You're not on the
and
top
the
of the
tech
pyramid,
transfers
man.
to. I was there for the tech
People
transfers
way
to other
above you.
companies.
Andy,
Andy.
No, there's not. That's not how this works. Like, there's no infinite higher conspiracy of people there. I knew the CSO directly as a personal friend. I've been to his house. I've ridden on his fucking motorbike with him. No, there is no higher shady person here, dude. biotech companies are not this massive shady
Okay, then keep
conspiracy
showing up
organization you think of.
for your new booster. That's fine. Just keep showing
Andy,
up.
Sure,
if you were really serious, if you were really serious about your stance, you should listen back to this live stream when it's recorded and listen to the recording and find certain things that he's talking about and try and fact check them. You know, fact check him.
There's
You know,
no way
and
to
prove
fact
to your
check the
audience
stuff
that he's
saying.
full of shit.
Yeah, you can
Dude,
fact
we
check
don't
me,
need
and
to
I've
be
already
convinced.
done
We
that for
already know
you.
it's not safe.
You know, I've already done this fact checking for you too,
know
and provided links to studies, links to explanations in that reply document to the documentary you asked me to watch. I've already done a lot of legwork for you. The things
What
I'm
you don't
saying, they
understand
already are
is that
proven.
people are not going to they're not going to be convinced that anything's safe when they know it's not. It's never going to happen.
Look. Think about what George Carlin, the famous comedian, said. Think about how dumb the average person is, and then remember that half of all people are dumber than
I
that.
don't believe
It's not
that's
about
literally such a negative worldview, you know?
But that's just the
Like,
world we live in. We live in a
it's
world where
not
the immune
though,
system is
man.
crap.
It's not
We
though. It's
live
that
in a
people
world
are
where most
being
people can't
convinced of
understand
stuff
advanced
and they're
science.
programmed by mainstream media. Okay, the average person is not inherently dumb.
People might be programmed by some forms of mainstream media, but the vaccines are not
They
something that anybody
absolutely
can be
are.
programmed by, because
Of course they
there's
can, dude.
literally
There's
no
only
way to program people
companies
about
that
vaccines
control
because
all
it's
the
too
media.
complicated to explain to them. Like, I have explained to you today more about the vaccines than you've probably ever heard from mainstream media, and including things you've never heard from mainstream media, because these things are not actually part of quote-unquote media propaganda. These are difficult scientific things that scientists specifically know that we talk to each other about, and not
Dude,
try to
fact that you
brainwash
think the
other people
average
with,
person
because
is
we
so
can't,
dumb,
even if we try, because people can't
that just
understand it because
shows
they don't have
that
the
you are
background to.
actually the elitist and you're the one who thinks that you're better than everyone, you know? Like
I
your
don't
own
think I'm better
statements
than
say that.
everyone. I
You
think
just
that
said
I
the
have
average
spent
person
years
is
getting
so
very good
dumb.
at a specific thing. I wouldn't say,
Whatever,
oh,
dude.
I know
You
how
said
to
the
do
average person is
everything
so
about
dumb.
quantum mechanics, or I know everything about petroleum, or
You can
I
get
know
lost
everything
in
about
all
other
your
fields.
fancy words and equations and statistics and all that. It's great, man. It doesn't really make a difference to us, man. We understand that the truth is that they're dangerous, and we stay away from them. Okay, and we'll
You
see.
understand
few
that
years,
you are a
who's
prophet and that
healthier?
you were doing things in a statistically insignificant manner, and yet claiming that you were right, despite the fact that you have been wrong in the past with your intuition about math.
What
If
makes
you
you
can't
Intuition is not
reconcile
wrong
and
about
recognize
this.
the fact that you've been wrong about your intuition with regards to mathematics before, I don't know what to tell you, man. It seems like you're just
Because I've been
hiding
studying
behind
the
the
New
fact that
World
you've been
Order for
wrong.
years.
Andy, you
Order
keep
for
saying that you're healthy. You're healthy. What makes you think that he's not healthy, or Chris or me are not healthy? Andy, I don't know if I even
Because
told
you
you this.
guys,
I can't believe I'm telling you this here. But yeah, I remember you were saying when during the pandemic, you were saying that these shots were gonna make people infertile. You know, and guess
not
what? I have a
everybody,
completely
dude.
100% natural kid on the way, a little boy.
Oh wow, that's great, man. But that's
Yeah.
not everybody, dude. Because not all these shots contain the dangerous substances in them.
Yeah, but
That's what we got to remember. They don't.
But
all
we're healthy
contain them.
too. I'm
That's
healthy.
fine.
Chris is healthy.
You are the ones who got lucky.
It's pretty obvious to see that
You
people
guys
aren't
that got
necessarily
lucky,
going to
not
get
me.
infertile even if they get the vaccine, right? A real
It's
vaccine.
you
But
guys
there's
that
plenty of
got
people.
lucky.
Look, if a person gets injected and then they have a vaccine-like reaction, which has inflammation, fever, flu-like symptoms, and then you detect their antibodies afterwards, and it shows, yes, they now have the COVID antibodies in them. That means they got the vaccine. It's very easy to prove who got the vaccine. All it takes is a blood draw and an antibody titer panel with an ELISA. It's very, very easy to prove who got a real vaccine.
Yeah, but not everyone has taken that test, so you wouldn't really know.
Except everybody who actually bothers to take the test has proven,
which is not everybody.
got a real vaccine. Where is the proof here that anybody who got tested did not actually get the vaccine and got some sort of placebo shot? It doesn't exist, because every person who has actually gotten tested of their own free will at third parties that are not part of some big conspiracy.
Well,
okay,
guess what?
Like, this could be at any local place that just has an ELISA kit that just runs it right there in front of you, can show that there is no possible fake way that they didn't get the actual vaccine and got an actual spike into their antibodies. It's that simple. What do you say to that?
If you keep showing up, eventually you're gonna get a bad batch. Okay, so if you want to keep showing up and keep playing Russian roulette, dude, go ahead, man.
Like I said, the flu vaccine has had more adverse reactions in 2022 than the COVID vaccine, and yet people keep taking the flu vaccines year after year, and it's not a big risk.
I think they know deep down that it's dangerous, or else if they thought it was so necessary, they would keep showing up. They haven't got more than 2.
I just don't think
project
it's as much of a threat today as it was before.
Okay, so then why are
But
people
I could
still
be
getting
wrong
it?
about that too, and I'm willing to be wrong about it.
Well, what's more important?
What's more important is that sometimes you accept that you can't know the future with 100% certainty, so you operate by the maximum benefit to self based off of probability and statistics.
Well, I can
That is
say
what
Kyle's
everyone does.
I mean, you're anti-booster vaxxer then.
I'm
He's
not.
not
I am not. I just don't
vaccine.
think COVID is as rampant as it was during the pandemic, and I just don't care to freaking go get a shot.
He just wants to stay at home, dude. Everybody can understand people who just want to
Just
stay at
wants to
home.
stay
I
at
understand
home.
that.
What do you mean just wants to stay at home? What does that mean?
As in walking physically to the clinic or the hospital is a pain in the ass sometimes. That's literally all that is. Like, I don't see anything from Kyle
so
that indicates
simple.
he doesn't believe in the vaccine.
Listen, I'm not going to go out and get shots for West Nile. I'm not going to go get a vaccine for West Nile or any of these other things. I'm just not worried about it hitting me nowadays.
Until someone says that you need it to go on a plane or something, then you'll get it. All right.
I mean,
because
if
that's
that's
when
the
we have a
case,
public
and I
state
really
of
want to go
emergency.
somewhere, yeah, for sure.
Okay, so then you just let people tell you what to do. Let the higher authority tell you what
You've
to
done
do.
that your whole life for things that are
Yeah,
important. You're just
But they
making an
wouldn't
exception for vaccines
require
now.
that unless there was actually a danger out there. They couldn't
Oh,
justify
but there was
it
never a
otherwise.
danger. That's the thing.
Huh?
There was
Well,
never
you
a
say,
danger.
okay, you keep
That's
saying,
what you say.
okay, this is
Yeah.
your cycle here. Okay, I've worked out your cycle. You say there was never a danger, and then you don't provide
Never
actual
a danger.
statistical proof of that. Then
There
you
was
say,
never a danger.
oh, I just know that
proved
these
it.
vaccines are going to be dangerous, and then you don't provide proof.
I'm the
proof
only
for that.
person who
And
you
then you
know
keep
that did
going in
what
a
they
loop
did
between these
in
two
the
and
first,
saying the same
in the
thing without
beginning of
adding
the
any new
pandemic.
evidence.
Dude, I actually put it to the test, though. I actually did.
How did you put it to the test, and how was your experiment designed, and what were the proper controls?
I was doing exactly the opposite of what everyone else was doing during the most dangerous period of the pandemic.
And how did you properly provide the control for the fact that 50% of Americans still
What
haven't caught
control?
COVID? How did you control
Dude,
that?
I went out. I didn't even catch it. Nothing happened.
Okay, so you didn't have an experimental control for the expected baseline of whether or not somebody doing all that would catch COVID. That means that your experiment wasn't significant. This is just
I was
how
with
math
thousands
works,
of
dude.
people in a crowded room at the
Yeah,
height of COVID,
and
and everyone was
how
fine.
does that prove anything at a statistical level? This is not how logic works.
Andy's experiment that he always repeats is that he went to a rave in downtown LA and didn't get
Not
sick.
a rave. I went to a rave every weekend for months.
Yeah.
And it was the same, about 5,000 people every time.
Okay,
It was
so
invite only.
I think
Everyone was
one of the
fine.
things that would make more sense for us to discuss here is probably not the personal level things or like what we've already discussed, but if you have additional topics regarding the vaccines,
Dude, that's
or
all I got.
questions,
We're literally
like
the opposite kind of people. We're the opposite kind of people.
Yeah,
So,
sure. So I think
our
what's better than
evidence
going
is
around in circles
completely
is to
opposite,
cover other questions people in your group might have that they're interested in answers for. Like if you have anything else to ask, like because I think it's more productive to cover more ground and educate on more topics in this sort of realm than rehash the same thing over and over again, where it becomes you claiming this thing and me saying stuff about
That's
math.
fine.
Right?
No, we're at the end of the hour anyway. It's over.
Okay.
So Andy, he has the recording, and maybe in the future there'll be a part 2. Not promising anything. I don't know how he feels about it, but just post this into your group. I think it's good for your group members to see it. And
I think
we'll
it's
get a
very
YouTube
obvious
link or something
now.
we can get like a private YouTube link where it's only people who have the link could see it or something, and we'll make sure everybody could see it, and then that's that.
Yeah,
Yes,
and I
sir.
hope it's very obvious now that I'm a real person and I'm not using ChatGPT to do anything, because to my knowledge, there's no voice chat bot that can speak the way that I am right now and actually explain facts the way I am. I'm a real dude, okay? I'm the real deal. I'm an actual scientist.
Yeah, and
yeah.
If you feel like staying in the group, just stay in the. I think unless your mind gets too worked up being in the group, stay in the group and make a comment every once in a while, disproving some evidence that people.
I'll try to do that, because I am very passionate about educating people and making a difference. Like the whole reason I'm a scientist is because I'm trying to save everyone. I want everybody to have long lives, even live forever, basically. Like I want humans to be elevated.
Anti-God. I understand. You're anti-God.
And look,
living forever is satanic. So
what?
Anti-God.
No one's meant to live forever.
Oh no, that's not his topic.
So you want to die then?
No.
So if you say that living forever is a bad thing, you want to die. You want everyone to die.
When my time comes, when everyone.
So you don't want anyone to live forever. You want everyone to die.
when their time
Well,
is,
if you
their
don't
numbers
want
fall.
everyone to live forever and you think it's satanic, then the only possible logical
I
conclusion,
know it is.
bulletproof conclusion, is that you want everyone to die.
That's the natural cycle of life. Yeah.
Okay,
Just let
so
it happen naturally.
you believe that you should stop anyone from stopping that and make it so that everyone dies forever.
Yeah,
That's
and
what
if
you
you were
want then.
born 200 years ago, you'd probably be dead already.
That's fine.
Okay, so when do you want to die? Do you have a
As long
specific date you want to die?
Whenever my natural time comes, I don't want to be tampered with by anything man-made. You know.
Okay, and I think that it's very sad that you want to decide for other people that they need to die.
I don't. I want
of
everyone to decide
whatever.
for themselves. That's my
If they
whole
can't
thing.
decide for themselves, if the disease decides for them, which is why we have medicine that keeps
That
people
would
from
be
dying and keeps them healthy.
if the disease is natural, that would be God deciding for them. If the disease is
Every
natural.
disease is natural because the world is natural.
Oh, right.
Everything
one
that
more
kills
topic.
you and makes you suffer is natural. So,
Right.
like, are antibiotics
Nothing's man-made
Satan's
being
work
put
then?
out into the world hurting people.
Antibiotics are not man-made.
Here's another
Penicillin is a
topic for you
completely
to touch
natural
on.
thing produced by funguses, and we just use it and put it into people so that they don't die from infections. Is that Satan's work? Do you want people to die from not having
That would be
antibiotic
natural.
access?
Then that would be natural. Then whatever's
Okay.
not natural.
What
I
about
don't
people
want...
who have to wear glasses? Are glasses Satan's work just because they help people to see when they naturally can't see? What about the AirPods you're wearing right now that were created by people so that you could enjoy experiences like music or this
I
conference
might
call
die
right now in
from these
privacy?
AirPods, but it's my choice.
I'm just saying, like, your
I might
whole
get
life is
cancer
full
and
of
die.
things that improve your life that aren't natural. And if your whole thing is naturalism,
We
you
should
should go
all
live
have
in
a
the
choice.
forest with no
We should
medicine to
all
keep
have a
you
choice.
alive.
Nothing should be held over our heads.
You have a choice. You could walk into the forest today and disappear and never interface with civilization again. Why haven't you done that if you believe so much in naturalism? I have friends who have done this, who believe in, like being on the road as natural hunter-gatherer farmers or whatever, and they've just shut off from all of society. Why haven't you done that if you believe so much in naturalism?
Because I love my family and I want to live near them, so I got to make sacrifices.
You could bring them with you. I think you know that the quality of life from human interventions is just better. And it's not this whole like Satan problem.
You're on the opposite extreme. You're on like the extreme of that, and you want to tamper with everything.
I wouldn't say I'm an extreme, dude. I'm a typical scientist with pretty moderate views on life. Like I think that from the bubble you're currently in,
you want people to live forever.
I would think that people getting to decide how long they want to live and when they want to die instead of suffering against their will is better, than just people randomly dying when they don't want
people
to
live forever. That's what you said. So
I just want people to live as long as they want to. I want people to have the freedom to decide and to be free of the horrible things that nature thrusts upon us. Why should a person who has a single base mutation that most people don't have end up having sickle cell that keeps them from living a happy, healthy life?
Why should
everybody else doesn't have it?
Why should a healthy person die from a vaccine they didn't want?
Why should that happen? It shouldn't happen in an ideal world,
well,
and we wish that it
happens
happen
all the time.
But everything that we do in life carries risk. There's no such thing as zero risk.
We're on the same side.
The matter is,
we're on the same
does it raise your relative
extreme.
risk when you take it? And the answer is it lowers it when you take a vaccine. So why should a person die walking down the street is essentially what you're asking. And the answer is we wish they wouldn't, but that just happens. And yet it's safe and it's worth doing. And there's plenty of things that are mandated that make sense that aren't vaccines in human lives, like paying taxes, okay? That just makes sense for us to do. And you having to walk to a tax repair carries risk. You having to go work at a company and walk down the street carries risk. 1,900 people die walking down the street. It's not non-zero risk. What the matters is this safe compared to a normal, safe, everyday activity? And vaccines, according to all available data, are. And because of that, it's fine to mandate them when the looming threat of something like COVID with a 99.8% survival rate, meaning 0.2% death rate, is worse than having to dodge trees falling around you for 2 years. It just makes sense to mandate it because it stops the equivalent of multiple holocausts and nuclear wars. Like, it's pretty obvious to me. All right, you can. We're rehashing the same thing now, but that's just basically. Those are basically my concluding remarks. And if you guys have other things to do, that totally makes sense for me. I'll try to stick around in the group to answer any other additional questions, or maybe try to debunk certain things that I think are factually incorrect. And potentially we could have a discussion like this on some other topic sometime. Yeah, and I will definitely send you the recording from today.
But yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. Yeah, and I'll work with you to get like the YouTube link or send it to me because Andy doesn't have a desktop, so it might be easier to send the video to me, or we'll facilitate it.
Okay. Okay.
Well, my concluding statement is that you can hide yourself however you want and try to remain anonymous, but since you've been exposed to all this, to all the information that you should need to be to see what's really going on, there's not going to be anything that's going to protect you from turning your eye, turning a blind eye to what's actually happening, which is how many millions of people are being hurt by this.
My views adapt
There's nothing
to data,
that's going to save you
right?
from that, either in this world or the next one. You're going to pay for it.
So my views adapt with data. I don't have any specific thing that I particularly care about to ignore new data that's statistically significant. My goal is
you're basically
always
just turning
the
your back
truth.
on intuition. So
My goal
that's
is
gonna
always
get
the
you.
truth, and I seek truth even to the point where I can humble myself and say, I don't trust my intuition. I need to trust rigorous results because I am passionate about getting things
Well, you're
right.
dead wrong on this one, buddy. You're dead wrong.
I mean, you can just say that, but you got to prove it, man.
You're dead wrong. It's going to be proven to you. It will be proven to you, and you will pay for it.
Yeah, Andy, don't say things like that. That's pretty.
Well,
harsh.
I've got a clear conscience because my whole life has just been about helping people, man. And I've cured 3 diseases already for different indications.
You do, but the thing is, you've sold your soul in a way. I'm not saying you meant to, but you did.
I haven't sold my soul, man. My conscience is clear. It's easy for me to say this. And in fact, what's to stop me from spinning this around and say, I believe that you have monetized a, small enclave of people and are leading them astray in order to sell something like nutraceuticals. Anybody can make this type of baseless accusation that doesn't make it true. And, I don't understand why you're making it towards me.
Because you're rejecting the truth. We can say the same thing, of course. But I'm just saying, you can hide yourself all you want. It's not going to help.
I don't reject the truth. I accept truth that I have done the actual data analysis and experiments directly myself for using actual scientific methods.
You're still
in a
promoting
lab.
The safety of the COVID vaccines. I understand.
Yes, I am, because it's safe.
And that's what you're going to pay for eventually.
And you're going to pay for eventually one day when you get a little bit better at math and realize you're wrong for misleading all these people who you turned off of vaccines that modern medicine says
and they're all
need
so
in order
unhealthy.
to increase your safety.
Wait so 5 years, Andy. Just wait 5 years.
We are.
Wait 10 years. Wait 20 years. I promise you, they're all going to be sick.
Anyway, I really hope that you revisit like mathematics and statistics, because what you're doing at a fundamental level is well-meaning. Like gathering all these people who you thought is injured is a great idea. If you want to prove something like that, you should do it. You should just gather it and make a spreadsheet. Add these names. Add their existing medical conditions that led up to this. If you can get that statistical significant proof, I will change my mind.
It'll be blatantly obvious, even for you.
Okay, I'm just saying, I changed my mind with data. So if you can get me the actual data that you actually put together,
you'll be changing your mind, but it might be too late.
You.
I'm just letting you know. All right.
Okay. But yeah, sure. If you end up getting it, send it to me. I would love to read it. I'm open to data always. Yep.
Okay. Cool.
Okay. Yeah, it was great talking to you guys.
Great talking to you. Thanks for taking the time for this, man. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, man.
Sure. And I apologize ahead of time if certain things in the call got heated. I am trying to have a pleasant debate, and I'm just really passionate about people and whether or not they're getting hurt by misinformation. In my point of view, anyway.
Misinformation, man, it's deadly.
I wish you guys well, and I really do hope you eventually change your mind about vaccines and get vaccinated. It's just really important.
All right, we'll be in touch, man. All right.
Yep.
Pigs fly.
See you guys.
All right.
See you guys. Bye.
All right, man. Thank you.